My stepmother and half-brother cut me out of my father's will. Now they need my signature to save the house. They say blood is thicker than water, but the day my father's will was read, I learned greed is thicker than both. I had been the one by his side through his final breath. The one who cleaned the hospital sheets, paid the bills when the insurance fell short, slept on a chair in that cold room for nights so he wouldn't be alone. My half-brother Daniel only showed up twice, once to ask about the inheritance and once to tell me he couldn't handle hospitals. His mother, my stepmother Helen, didn't even bother pretending to care. Yet when the lawyer opened that brown envelope and read out my father's last wishes, every property, every savings account, every piece of land went to Daniel. My name wasn't there, not even for the old watch my father promised me when I was a boy. I sat there frozen while Helen smiled like she just won a war. Daniel patted my shoulder and said, "Don't take it personally, Dad just wanted to keep the estate together." As if that explained stabbing me in the back, I walked out of that office with nothing but my dignity and a small box of my father's clothes that Helen had so generously let me take. I found a small apartment across town and told myself I was done with them. They could keep their money. I'd build my own life from the ground up. Months passed. I picked up extra shifts, saved every penny, found peace in the quiet life I was building. Until one rainy evening there was a knock on my door. I opened it to find Daniel and Helen standing there, soaked and desperate. Daniel's suit was wrinkled. Helen's makeup streaked from the rain. They didn't even wait for me to invite them in before Daniel blurted, "The bank is about to take the house. We need your help." I stood there in the doorway, my fingers tightening on the frame, my mind replaying every word from that day in the lawyer's office, every cold look, every smug smile. Helen stepped forward, her voice trembling, saying it was what my father would have wanted, that they'd been unfair before. Daniel avoided my eyes, mumbling about how the market had been bad and they'd made some bad investments. The same house where I grew up, where my father taught me how to ride a bike, where Helen once told me I'd never be part of their real family. Now they were asking me to save it. My heart pounded in my chest, not from pity, but from something else entirely, something darker. I took a slow step back, letting the rain from their coats drip onto my floor, my mind racing as I realized this wasn't about family. It wasn't about my father's wishes. It was about survival. Theirs, not mine. Daniel glanced over his shoulder like he was afraid someone might see them here. Helen's hands were clasped tightly, her knuckles pale, and for a brief moment, I saw a flicker of something in her eyes I had never seen before. Fear. She started talking fast, telling me how the mortgage had ballooned after some unexpected expenses. How they had taken out loans to renovate the house, how the tenants in the rental properties had stopped paying, every word spilling out like water from a cracked pipe. But behind it, I could still hear the echo of her voice from years ago telling me to find somewhere else to stay after my father married her. I could still feel the sting of being told I wasn't real family, while she smiled sweetly at the neighbors. Daniel kept shifting his weight, looking everywhere but at me, his jaw tightening whenever Helen spoke, like maybe he didn't agree with her story. Or maybe he didn't want me to know the real one. I leaned against the doorway, listening, my heart steady now, almost calm, because while they were painting themselves as victims of bad luck, all I could think about was the moment I'd sat in that lawyer's office, the taste of metal in my mouth, the way my father's signature had sealed my absence from everything he owned. "Please," Helen whispered, stepping closer, "if we lose the house, we'll have nowhere to go." Her voice cracked at the end, but her eyes never softened. They were sharp, calculating, measuring every flicker of my face. I knew that look. It was the same one she wore when she'd cornered my father into selling land that should have gone to me, the same one she wore when she convinced him to rewrite the will for the good of the family. The rain outside was heavier now, pounding against the street like it was trying to wash the whole night away, but nothing could wash away the years I'd spent on the outside looking in, the birthdays they celebrated without inviting me, the Christmas mornings where my father gave Daniel gifts and told me mine would come later. I stepped aside slowly, letting them in, the smell of rain and cold air following them into my small apartment. Helen looked around like she was cataloging every piece of furniture, every chipped cup on the counter. Daniel stayed by the door, rubbing his hands together, and that's when I realized, whatever brought them here tonight wasn't just desperation. It was something else, something they weren't telling me. Daniel cleared his throat, glancing at Helen like he was asking for permission to speak. She gave the smallest shake of her head, but he ignored it. "It's not just the house," he said, his voice low. "There's another reason we came." Helen shot him a look so sharp it could have cut glass, but I didn't miss the way her fingers curled tighter into her palm. "Daniel," she hissed, "this isn't the time." "No," I said, my voice steady. "This is exactly the time." The air in my apartment felt heavier, the only sound the ticking of the clock on the wall and the rain outside. Daniel shifted his gaze to me, his Adam's apple bobbing. The bank. They're not the only ones after us, he said finally. We owe money, a lot of money, to people who don't wait for court orders, he swallowed hard. If we can't pay, they'll take the house, and maybe more. Helen's lips pressed into a thin line, her eyes locking on mine like she was trying to gauge how much of this I believed. Don't listen to him, she said sharply. This is just a small setback. All we need is for you to sign. She caught herself, biting down on the rest of the sentence, but I'd already heard enough. Sign what? And why did her voice shake just enough on that word to make my stomach tighten? I leaned forward in my chair, my elbows resting on my knees. Go on, I said to Daniel. Tell me exactly what it is you want me to sign. Helen's hand shot out, gripping his wrist, but he pulled free. They want the house as collateral, he said. But it's not in our names anymore. Dad changed the paperwork before he died. It's in a trust, and you, he hesitated. You're the only one who can release it. The words sank in slowly, heavy as wet stone. After everything, after cutting me out of the will, the one thing they needed now was me. And in that moment, I realized the truth. They weren't here to make peace. They weren't here because of family. They were here because without me, they had nothing. I leaned back in my chair, the weight of Daniel's words settling over the room like a thick fog. Helen sat stiffly across from me, her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles were white. Daniel wouldn't stop rubbing his palms together, and I realized for the first time that it wasn't just the rain making them look cold. It was fear. So, I said slowly, you're telling me that after throwing me out of my father's will, after telling me I was nothing to this family, the only way you can keep the house is if I agree to sign it over to you? Helen's mouth twitched, her carefully controlled smile faltering for just a second. It's not like that, she said, her tone turning sugary. We were wrong before. We misjudged you, but this is bigger than the past. I let the silence stretch, enjoying the way her voice wavered at the edges. Funny, I said, because the past seems to be sitting right in front of me, dripping water all over my floor. Daniel finally spoke, his voice hoarse. Look, I know we messed up. I know you hate us. Hate? I interrupted, leaning forward. No, Daniel. Hate would mean I still care enough to feel something. What I feel is nothing, and that's dangerous, because it means I don't have a reason to help you. Helen's eyes narrowed, but she quickly masked it with another brittle smile. We'll make it worth your while, she said. We can give you a cut once things turn around. I almost laughed, a short, sharp sound that made them both flinch. A cut? Of what? The scraps you leave behind after you've bled the place dry? No. I think you came here tonight under the impression that I'm still the same person you could push aside. But things have changed. The clock ticked loudly, each second stretching, the rain still pounding outside, and I could feel the shift happening. Their confidence draining, their desperation growing, and my control over this moment settling in like a storm ready to break. Helen adjusted her coat, her voice colder now. So what do you want? She asked, but I didn't answer right away, because I wanted them to sweat. I let her question hang in the air, the silence wrapping tighter around them until Daniel's knees started bouncing. What do I want? I repeated slowly. That's the wrong question. You should be asking what I'm willing to sign. Helen's brow furrowed. We're not here to play games. If we don't move fast, the house is gone. I leaned forward, my voice steady. No. If I don't move fast, the house is gone, because Dad put it in a trust, and I'm the sole trustee. Without my signature, nothing happens. Not a sale, not a loan, not even a lease. Helen's lips pressed into a thin line. That trust was meant to protect the family. I nodded slowly. And it is. It's protecting me from you. Daniel shifted uncomfortably. So what? You're just going to let the bank take it? I shook my head. No. I'm offering you a deal. If I sign anything, it won't be to release the house to you. It'll be to transfer full ownership to me. Permanently, legally, so I can decide who lives there and under what terms. Helen's eyes widened. That's not an offer, that's theft. I leaned back, smiling faintly. No, Helen. Theft was when you convinced Dad to cut me out of his will. This is just me holding the pen you need, and deciding how much ink I'm willing to use. Helen's breath caught, and for the first time since she stepped through my door, she looked small, not powerless, but cornered. Daniel stared at the floor, his voice barely above a whisper. If we do that, the debt doesn't go away. And there it was, the final truth they'd been dancing around. This wasn't just about the bank. How much? I asked. Daniel hesitated, his lips parting, but Helen cut him off. It's not important. Humor me. He swallowed. 480,000. The number landed heavy in the room, and I couldn't stop the low whistle that escaped my lips. That's not a bad month at the office. That's ruin. Helen's chin lifted, defiance creeping back into her posture. We had expenses. I leaned forward. No. You had greed. And you thought you could gamble because you were sitting in my father's house, with his name still shining on the mailbox. You thought you'd always have something to borrow against. Daniel's voice cracked. We didn't know the trust. You didn't bother to check, I cut in. Because you assumed I was still the kid you could shove out of the picture. The one who'd take whatever scraps you offered. I stood, letting the silence work on them. The rain was still hammering the glass, each drop a slow countdown. You came here thinking I'd save you, I said. But the truth is, you're already gone. That debt, it doesn't vanish even if I hand you the deed. It just gives them more to take. Helen's eyes darted toward the door, like she could still run from this conversation. I walked to my small desk, pulled open a drawer, and took out the folder that had been sitting there for months, the trust papers, sealed and final. I laid them on the table, flat and deliberate. This, I said, tapping the cover, is my father's last word. Not the will you orchestrated, Helen. Not the one you smiled over in that office. This is the real safeguard he left behind. Maybe he didn't have the guts to tell you, but somewhere in him he knew. Helen's lips parted, the smallest flicker of uncertainty crossing her face. I opened the folder, took out the top sheet, and slid it toward them. I'm not signing anything tonight. In fact, I'm locking this away where no one, especially you, can touch it. The house stays in my hands. The debt stays in yours. Daniel's head dropped into his palms. Helen stared at me like she was trying to memorize my face for the day she'd get the upper hand again. You can tell your creditors, I said, that the man you cut out of the will is the only one who could have saved you, and chose not to. I closed the folder, slid it back into the drawer, and turned the key. The sound of the lock clicking home was louder than the rain. When the door closed, I leaned against it and let out a slow breath. For the first time in years, I wasn't the one left standing in the rain. When someone shows you what you mean to them through their actions, believe them. Don't assume that desperate circumstances will make them suddenly value you. Life has a way of flipping the table. One day, you might be the one asking for help. Another day, you might be the one holding the pen. How you handle those moments defines your character. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, share, comment, and subscribe for more powerful stories.